All right, hi folks. Woohoo, getting set up. So this is a time lapse I recorded of a landscape painting I did. I decided that it would be fun, and I'm in a group of people who encouraged me to do a sort of virtual plein air every day for a week over the holidays. We called it Plein Solstice because the middle of the week was the solstice, and this is the painting I did on the solstice. So virtual plein air is using a digital photo. A lot of people use Google Street View for this to paint sort of landscape paintings. It's a really fun practice. I've done it a lot doing digital paintings as part of my training as a concept artist, and I really enjoy doing it with gouache. So this week I did 100% gouache paintings. And for this painting that I did for the the solstice itself, I decided it would be fun to paint a winter scene because it's super winter where I am. And I picked this scene off of Map Crunch, just sort of clicking randomly until I got a winter scene I liked. It's really a beautiful reference photo all on its own, but it's pretty complicated, and I was a little worried about making sure that I simplified it enough. So you can see here some of my gouache process, which is putting down a coat of paint to sort of tint the page so that it's not white, which I think is really helpful for me to sort of manage my values. And it also sets the mood for the piece. So I went from sort of a warmer blue and the sort of ultramarine blue all the way over to a phthalo, even a little bit of blue teal. And that gives me a little bit of temperature variation without having to like paint that in later, right? It's sort of like a gift for future me. And then I laid in my darks. And at this point, I'm not using any of my black gouache. I'm using just sort of my basic colors. So dark colors like Spectrum Violet and Ultramarine, and what else do I have? Winsor Green. So those colors all have really, really dark base values just out of the tube. None of them are as dark as a sort of a black paint that you might get in gouache, but they're pretty dark. So I used those to lay in sort of those dark zones that is this line of trees silhouetted against the setting sun. And I used those, like I used that whole range of them because I wanted that temperature variation. You can see some of them are green, some of them are blue, some of them are red. The river itself feels sort of green and purple. That temperature variation is going to give me a lot of interest where otherwise the values are pretty much the same. And you can see me exploring that too with the snow in the foreground and with the sky that's peeking through in the background. Because this painting, I feel like you really need to keep it down to two or three values to really sell it. It's such a stark winter scene. But when you're working with limited values, you really want to make sure that you're communicating with color and temperature. And using color and temperature let me keep this scene really graphic, which I think really helped it, and let me stylize it a lot, not worry about painting every single little branch, but it also made it read really well. So I'm sort of, you can see me fiddling with the sky, I'm double checking my reference, I'm laying in these sort of blue edges to the trees to show the light sort of filtering through those branches. And I'm coming back into the snow for a bit. There was a lot of subtlety in the snow in the reference photo, and I didn't really sit there and try and figure it all out. It wasn't going to be something that I was going to get into a painting this size, like accurately. I'm not a small detailed painter, so I figured what I would do is try and focus on creating the effect that I wanted with the snow as opposed to mapping out all of the little undulations and so forth. So I'm really pushing my saturation in the snow, more and less saturated. Here I am coming back in to the river, and I think at this point I've gotten out my black paint. So painting with gouache, you really have to focus and stay like pay attention to your values, because that is for me the trickiest part by far. I find because gouache does shift in value as it dries, you can actually see this in the time lapse. Things dry a lot lighter when they're dark colors, and things dry a lot darker when they're light colors. And part of that is just because of the nature of the paint and the fact that it's a very matte finish. So whatever intensity it might have while it's glossy and wet, it loses, which is like a thing you get used to pretty quickly if you paint with it, a few times. But it does mean that values, like my instincts, don't necessarily guide me well with the values. So when I pull out that black paint, I am really intentionally laying in these final darks that are going to be the most important for creating depth and delineating the trees from one another. And you can see I used it in the river, and here I am laying in some foreground trees. I really wanted these to pop, so I'm going in with very dark colors, very warm colors, you know, like that's like a very black brown in that tree on the right, and we're getting into more greens on the left there. Just making sure that they stand out against sort of the background. Even though value-wise, right, it's kind of one big shape, I'm letting the colors and just a little bit of that value push darker. So I'm laying in a little bit of that surface detail on the river, just enough to tell you that it's water, right? I don't want to paint every single little rock or such. I wouldn't enjoy that. You wouldn't enjoy seeing it because I wouldn't do a good job. And again, this is something I painted in just over an hour, so this is a quick effort. And here I am laying in the sun sparkles on the water, which was absolutely the best part of the reference photo. It's an incredible little highlight. And you can see some of them even on the snow. So the sun is sort of peeking through all of those branches, lighting up just the last little bits of the day. And I'm coming in with a color that dried, I mean, a lot darker than I was expecting. But as it dried, I realized I liked it. I felt like that darker value was probably the right call in there. And I'm using that value and a little bit of temperature shift to create some depth. And here I am laying a little bit of rim lighting and snow on these foreground trees, just to make sure that you can tell that they are popping out from the background. And here's where things got a little messy. I laid in these sort of warm, sunlit rim lights. And that tree on the left, it got very blobby. And then I added brown and it somehow just got blobbier, which is, I would say blobby is how gouache goes for me. But I looked at the reference and I was like, you know what, that's a birch tree, and instead of ignoring that, what if I just made it a birch tree? So I went in with some cool colors about the same value as that brown blob, and then I laid in those darks. And here I am doing the final sort of pass with a dry brush approach to lay in some of those melted snow, the the sort of bits and pieces that you see peeking through. And that's that. I'm really happy with this painting, and I hope you enjoyed watching me paint it, and I'd love to know if you have any questions. Pop them in the comments, and thanks for watching. Hope you have a very good day.